In a fiery Capitol Hill exchange, Representative Jasmine Crockett launched a shocking insult at President Donald Trump, calling him an old white Nepo baby in the White House. What happened next left the entire room speechless. Trump, never one to hold back, fired back with brutal humor that instantly silenced Crockett and sent the internet into chaos. Viewers couldn't stop talking about Trump's hilarious but cutting comeback that flipped the tables on live TV. The air inside Capitol Hill was thick with tension. The shutdown that began on October 1st had already furloughed hundreds of thousands of workers, and emotions were running high. Farmers were crying out about lost livelihoods, small businesses were shutting their doors, and families were anxiously watching bills pile up. Against this backdrop, the cameras turned to Texas Democrat Representative Jasmine Crockett. She leaned into the microphone on MSNBC, her voice sharp with frustration. "I don't know who feels safe in this country except for the white supremacists," she declared. Her eyes narrowed, and then came the line that froze the entire room. "The old white Nepo baby sitting in the White House is the cause of all this destruction, pain, and suffering." Gasps rippled across the room. The anchor shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught off guard. For a moment, even the studio lights seemed to dim under the weight of her words. Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States, was watching closely from the White House. His aides glanced nervously at him, waiting for his reaction. Would he brush it off, or would he strike back? The silence before his response was more powerful than any insult. By the following morning, Crockett's words had already gone viral. The clip of her mocking Trump, calling him an old white Nepo baby and comparing him to a child fumbling with phonics, racked up to million views in just hours. On X, hashtags like Nepo baby president and Trump mock trended. But for millions of Americans struggling through the shutdown, her words felt less like truth and more like a cruel distraction. Farmers in Iowa, factory workers in Ohio, and small-town families across Texas shared their frustration. "We're worried about putting food on the table," one farmer posted. "And all they can do is mock the president." Inside the White House, Trump's team debated furiously. Some urged him to let it slide, fearing more attention would only fuel her. But Trump leaned back in his chair, a small smirk forming. He had been here before. Insults, mockery, lies, and each time, he found a way to turn the attack into a moment of strength. "People are hurting," he finally said, breaking the tension. "She thinks this is about me, but it's about them. Time to show her." The room went still again. His staff knew Trump was about to strike back. That evening, Trump took the stage at a rally in Dallas, right in Jasmine Crockett's backyard. The arena was packed wall to wall, thousands of Americans waving flags, chanting, and holding signs demanding an end to the shutdown. Cameras from every major network were live. He didn't open with his usual greetings. Instead, he went straight to the heart of the matter. "Folks," he began, voice booming, "you've seen the clip. Jasmine Crockett, the so-called representative from Texas, calling me an old white Nepo baby. Can you believe it?" The crowd roared with boos, but Trump raised his hand to quiet them. His expression hardened, and then, just when people expected anger, he delivered a line so sharp, so brutally funny, that the audience erupted into uncontrollable laughter. The insult wasn't cruel for cruelty's sake. It was clever, witty, and devastatingly timed. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in on shocked faces, and social media lit up in real time. Even those who didn't support Trump couldn't deny it. The comeback had landed. Jasmine Crockett, watching from her office, looked stunned. She hadn't expected this, and in that moment, America leaned in closer. Within minutes of Trump's Dallas rally speech, the clip of his comeback exploded across the internet. News outlets rushed to replay the moment, but it wasn't the reporters or pundits who carried it. It was ordinary Americans. Truck drivers on break, mothers in kitchens, farmers scrolling after work, everyone was sharing it. Crockett, humiliated, shot into the top trends alongside terms like Giro Mega Car Shutdown Truth and Simply Trump. Even people who admitted they weren't fans couldn't ignore the humor and precision in his response. He didn't just clap back, one viral post read. He buried her in her own hypocrisy. Meanwhile, Crockett's team scrambled. The very insult she had thrown, old white Nepo baby, was now being mocked in reverse. Memes flooded feeds showing Trump standing tall, while Crockett fumbled with microphones, with captions reading, "Who's the Nepo now?" Inside MSNBC, Producers debated whether to replay Crockett's segment. Some worried it was backfiring badly. Others argued controversy was good for ratings, but one staffer whispered what many were secretly thinking: Trump just flipped the script. She looks smaller now. Crockett herself sat in silence, staring at her phone as the backlash unfolded. The next morning, Capitol Hill buzzed like a hornet's nest. Journalists swarmed hallways, chasing lawmakers for reactions. Some Democrats tried to brush off Trump's rally response as typical bluster, but even their tone carried unease. Republicans, on the other hand, were jubilant. "Did you hear him?" one GOP senator chuckled to reporters. "He turned her own words into a weapon. That's classic Trump." Behind closed doors, Democratic aides begged Crockett to avoid cameras. They feared any new comment would only pour fuel on the fire. But Crockett, shaken yet defiant, insisted she wouldn't back down. Still, her eyes betrayed uncertainty. Trump, meanwhile, prepared for another statement, this time from the White House. Advisors encouraged him to keep his focus on the shutdown, to appear presidential. But Trump knew the people wanted more than policy. They wanted honesty, humor, and fire. That afternoon, he emerged from the Oval Office and stood at the podium. Cameras zoomed in, reporters leaned forward, ready. "You know, folks," he began, "they said I should ignore her. They said don't answer back. But when someone lies about you, lies about America, sometimes you've got to fight." The words shook the room. Trump paused, letting the weight of silence hang. Then, with a smile, he continued, "Jasmine Crockett thinks calling me an old white Nepo baby makes her smart, but here's the truth. I built something. I built businesses, I built jobs, I built an America where families could thrive again." What has she built? Nothing. Except a career out of tearing other people down. Gasps filled the press room. It wasn't just a defense, it was a gut punch delivered with calm precision. Cameras captured the faces of stunned journalists, some scribbling furiously, others frozen. Across the country, Americans stopped what they were doing. In diners, gas stations, and living rooms, people leaned closer to screens. Some cheered, others teared up, hearing their frustrations voiced with clarity. Social media lit up again. One veteran wrote, "I don't care what party you're in. This is a man defending not just himself, but all of us who've been mocked and ignored." Another comment read, "For the first time in a long time, I feel like someone is speaking for me." Crockett, watching from her office, felt her throat tighten. The room that had once laughed with her was now laughing at her, and America was only getting started. By the following morning, Jasmine Crockett could no longer ignore the storm. Reporters camped outside her office, shouting questions about Trump's rally remarks. "Congresswoman, did you really fail the bar exam multiple times?" One asked, "Is it true your campaign was funded by out-of-state PACs?" Another pressed. Her aides tried to shield her, but the questions were relentless. Crockett snapped back at one camera crew, calling Trump a pathological liar, yet her voice trembled. The once confident lawmaker now looked cornered, her usual fire reduced to shaky defiance. Inside her office, staff huddled, scrolling through X with pale faces. Hashtags like jarring Crockett fraud and Koronix Gate dominated the platform. One viral clip showed a side-by-side of Crockett mocking Trump's speech slips and Trump highlighting her failed prosecutions. The contrast was devastating. Meanwhile, Trump's words from Dallas still echoed nationwide. To struggling families, they weren't just jokes. They were reminders of who was actually fighting for them. "Every time she mocks me," Trump had said, "she mocks you. She mocks the workers, the farmers, the families who've given everything for this country." That line hit Americans in the gut. And Crockett had no idea how much worse it was about to get. As Crockett fought to save face, ordinary Americans told their stories on live TV. A farmer from Nebraska, his hands rough from years in the fields, spoke through tears. "She blames Trump for our struggles, but he's the only one who ever sent us aid. Without him, we'd have lost the farm years ago." A mother in Ohio, furloughed from her federal job, choked up as she explained how Crockett's words felt like a slap. "We're real people, not props for politicians to score points. President Trump has flaws, sure, but at least he talks about us. She just insults." Networks replayed these testimonies alongside Trump's Dallas comeback, magnifying the emotional weight. Even some liberal commentators admitted that Crockett had overplayed her hand. Attacking the president is one thing, one anchor said. But mocking millions of Americans by extension, that's dangerous. In living rooms across America, viewers wept. Trump's comeback was no longer just a punchline. It was a defense of ordinary people who felt invisible. Crockett sat in her office, watching one clip after another. For the first time, she realized this wasn't about Trump anymore. It was about the people, and they weren't laughing with her. They were crying with him. That evening, Trump wasn't done. At a White House press briefing, he looked straight into the cameras. His tone was firm but emotional. They say I'm an old white Nepo baby. Fine. I'll wear that if it means I'm standing up for the forgotten men and women of this country. But let's be honest, who's really forgotten here? The single mom waiting on her paycheck, the farmer praying not to lose his land, the veteran wondering if his sacrifice mattered. That's who I'm fighting for. The room went silent. Even some reporters lowered their eyes. Then, with that signature Trump humor, he added, "By the way, if Jasmine Crockett wants me to learn phonics, maybe she should start by learning honesty, because that's a word she can't seem to pronounce." The press room erupted with gasps, laughter, and hurried scribbling of notes. Online, the clip spread like wildfire. It wasn't just funny. It was cutting, surgical, and unforgettable. Crockett, once the aggressor, now looked small and exposed. Trump had turned her insult into his shield, his sword, and his rallying cry. America leaned in, waiting for what would come next. Capitol Hill was boiling with reporters the next morning. As Crockett entered a committee room, cameras swarmed, throwing questions at her like darts. One shouted, "Congresswoman, what's your response to Trump's rally in Dallas?" Another pressed, "Is it true you faced ethics complaints in Texas?" For a moment, Crockett's trademark bravado cracked. She forced a laugh, waving off the questions, but her eyes betrayed panic. "The president lies all the time," she said. "This is just another distraction," but her words lacked the sharp sting that once defined her jabs. Inside the chamber, lawmakers whispered. Some Democrats shifted uncomfortably in their seats, worried her feud with Trump was dragging them into unwanted fire. Republicans, however, smirked knowingly. One congressman leaned to a colleague. "She picked the wrong guy to mess with. Trump doesn't just clap back. He dismantles." Meanwhile, Americans at home watched the replay of her dodging questions. Many shook their heads. "She can dish it, but she can't take it," one veteran muttered on a live call-in radio show. The pressure was building, and Trump hadn't even revealed the full weight of his response yet. Back at the White House, Trump prepared for another statement. This time, it wasn't at a rally. It was in the East Room, under the chandeliers, in front of a sea of cameras. The atmosphere was different, more solemn. He stepped to the podium and looked straight into the lenses. "They say I'm a Nepo baby," he began, his tone steady, "but I worked, I built, I fought. And I'll tell you what, I've never forgotten the people who built this country with their bare hands." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Crockett mocks me, but when she mocks me, she mocks the farmer who can't sleep at night. She mocks the trucker who's wondering how to pay for gas. She mocks the mother trying to put food on the table. That's who she insulted, not me." The room fell silent. Even critics admitted it was one of his most emotional moments since the shutdown began. Clips of people crying as they watched spread across TikTok and X. One woman tweeted, "I never thought I'd say this, but I cried listening to Trump tonight." He wasn't defending himself. He was defending us. By the evening, Crockett faced a brutal reality. The narrative had slipped completely out of her hands. Her team scrambled to issue a press release accusing Trump of twisting her words, but it barely made a ripple. Instead, America was glued to Trump's East Room address. Clips of him tying her insult to the pain of everyday Americans dominated every feed. Hashtags like Trump defends and Crockett collapse climbed the charts. At a small diner in Pennsylvania, a group of laid-off workers huddled around a TV, nodding through his speech. One whispered, "He sees us." She doesn't. In Texas, even some of Crockett's own constituents admitted on local radio that Trump's words cut deeper than her insults. Meanwhile, Crockett sat alone in her office, scrolling through a flood of criticism. Donors weren't calling, allies weren't rushing to defend her. And every time she refreshed her phone, another Trump clip had gone viral. The Capitol lights flickered that night, but for Jasmine Crockett, the darkness was inside her office. She was learning, too late, that one insult can change everything when it hits the wrong man at the wrong moment. The corridors of Capitol Hill felt heavier than usual the morning after Trump's East Room speech. Reporters filled the air with questions, and aides shuffled nervously, trying to avoid the chaos. But it wasn't just the press that had changed, it was the lawmakers themselves. Some Democrats privately admitted Trump had struck a chord. "We may not like him," one whispered to a colleague, "but Crockett gave him the perfect opening, and he used it." Others worried openly that the shutdown debate was being overshadowed by her feud with the president. Meanwhile, Republicans were energized. One senator told a group of cameras, "Crockett's insult wasn't just about Trump, it was about millions of Americans who fought tooth and nail for their families." And the president reminded us of that. Social media made it worse for Crockett. Clips of her mockery replayed alongside crying farmers and mothers who felt insulted by her words. Hashtags like "she mocked us" spread faster than wildfire. Crockett sat in her office, head in her hands. She had wanted a viral moment, but this wasn't the kind of fame she imagined. Now, whispers in the Capitol weren't about Trump. They were about whether she had become a liability. Later that day, Trump returned to the cameras. This time, it wasn't humor alone, it was exposure. Standing at the podium, he leaned forward and spoke with deliberate force. "Jasmine Crockett says I'm a Nepo baby," he began. "Well, let's talk about nepotism. Let's talk about someone who failed the bar exam multiple times then slid into politics on connections, not hard work." Gasps erupted among the press pool. Trump wasn't pulling punches anymore. He cited reports of Crockett's campaign donors out of state PACs tied to radical groups. He reminded the nation of her record as a prosecutor, where cases crumbled under her watch. "This is the person mocking farmers, truckers, moms," Trump asked, his voice rising. "This is the person who calls Americans white supremacists just for wanting safe neighborhoods and full paychecks. She isn't fighting for you, she's fighting for herself." The room went silent, except for the frantic clicking of cameras. Within minutes, the clip hit every platform. The crowd outside the White House burst into chants of "USA, USA," while Crockett's phone lit up with messages she couldn't bear to open. Trump had just raised the stakes. Across the nation, the impact was undeniable. In diners, churches, and small-town living rooms, Americans were glued to their screens. It wasn't just politics anymore, it was personal. A father in Kentucky, his farm on the edge of bankruptcy, spoke through tears on a local broadcast. "When she insulted Trump, she insulted us. But when he defended himself, he defended every one of us who's been forgotten." In Michigan, a factory worker told a reporter, "I cried watching him last night, not because I'm political, but because for the first time, I felt like someone up there sees my struggle." Even some Democrats couldn't hold the line. A staffer anonymously told a journalist, "Crockett overplayed her hand, and Trump's turning it into a movement." Meanwhile, Crockett sat isolated in her office, scrolling through endless criticism. Her staff avoided eye contact. Donors were silent, allies whispered about distance. On the other side, Trump's approval among working-class Americans soared. It wasn't just about a comeback line anymore. It was about connection, emotion, and truth. And as night fell, one thing became clear: this wasn't just a clash. It was becoming a turning point in America's shutdown battle. The next committee session on Capitol Hill was tense. Cameras were already trained on every movement. Crockett entered the chamber with a forced smile, but the whispers were deafening. Lawmakers leaned toward each other, staffers exchanged nervous glances, and reporters sharpened their pens. When Trump arrived, the atmosphere shifted instantly. He walked in calm, confident, carrying the weight of millions of Americans on his shoulders. Everyone knew he had already won the public battle, but would he deliver one more strike inside the Capitol itself? As the gavel struck, Trump leaned into the microphone. His voice was steady but carried an unmistakable edge. "They say only white supremacists feel safe in this country," he began. "Tell that to the black business owners who thrived under my economy. Tell that to the Hispanic families who saw record low unemployment. Tell that to every minority who got a second chance because of the First Step Act." Gasps filled the room. For a split second, Crockett's expression faltered. She knew this wasn't just a comeback anymore. It was an indictment of her entire narrative. The cameras caught it all. America was watching. Outside, the crowd of journalists erupted as Trump's words hit the airwaves. Clips from the Capitol hearing went viral within minutes, reaching millions across the nation. Hashtags like Trump Truth Bomb and Trump Turns the Tables dominated social media. In Texas, Crockett's own district felt the impact. Local radio callers expressed anger. "She doesn't speak for us," one man said. "We're tired of her using race as a shield while ignoring our struggles." Another caller, a single mother, broke down in tears live on air. "I may not have liked Trump before, but today I felt heard." Inside Crockett's office, aides scrambled to spin the fallout, but they could barely keep up. Donations slowed to a trickle, emails flooded in, angry, disappointed, even from longtime supporters. "You went too far," one message read. Mocking him meant mocking us. Meanwhile, Trump's allies celebrated. "This isn't just politics," a senator whispered to a reporter. "This is a movement." Crockett gave him a gift, and he's turning it into a hammer. By evening, even critics admitted Crockett was no longer the attacker, she was the wounded target. That night, Crockett faced her lowest moment yet. Alone in her office, she scrolled through endless clips of Trump's Capitol response. Each one stung worse than the last. His words weren't just cutting her down, they were lifting others up. She replayed her own insult, "old white Nepo baby," and cringed at how hollow it now sounded compared to Trump's defense of farmers, mothers, veterans, and minorities. She had wanted to paint him as selfish, but somehow, he had flipped her insult into a story about America itself. Meanwhile, outside her window, chants echoed from the streets, "USA, USA." Protesters had gathered, waving flags, holding signs that read, "We are not mocked, and Trump speaks for us." On social media, Americans shared their personal stories, losses, sacrifices, and small triumphs tying them to Trump's words. Many admitted to crying while watching him speak. Crockett buried her face in her hands. The fight she thought she could win with mockery had turned into a tidal wave against her. And for Trump, it was only the beginning. He wasn't finished teaching her and America a lesson. The next morning, Trump struck again, this time, not with humor, but with precision. At a press conference, he pulled no punches. "You want to talk about honesty?" he asked, his voice calm but cutting. "Let's talk about Jasmine Crockett's record. Let's talk about her donors, her failures as a prosecutor, her silence when families cried out for justice." He laid out details: campaign cash tied to radical PACs, ethics complaints ignored by the media, cases she mishandled that left victims without justice. Every fact landed like a blow, shocking the room into silence. Reporters, usually quick to interrupt, had nothing to say. Even rival networks replayed his words and edited. On social media, Americans reacted with disbelief. "Why didn't we know this before?" one post read. Another went viral. "She tried to clown him, and he brought receipts." Crockett's staff watched in horror as hashtags like Crockett exposed and fraud files trended across platforms. Donors who once supported her quietly backed away, unwilling to be tied to the unraveling scandal. And in living rooms across America, ordinary people shook their heads. For them, Trump wasn't just defending himself. He was exposing corruption they always suspected. As the revelation spread, the emotional weight landed hardest on everyday Americans. A farmer in Iowa who had nearly lost everything during the shutdown broke down on a local news interview. Crockett mocked him, but when he spoke, it felt like he was standing up for me, he said, his voice cracking. "I cried watching him defend us." In Ohio, a laid-off federal worker shared her story on the radio. "I felt invisible, like politicians only remember us when they want votes. But Trump's words, they reminded me I still matter. I cried at my kitchen table." Clips of these emotional testimonies flooded social media, amplifying the divide. Some mocked the tears, but many more echoed them, admitting they too wept listening to Trump. Even longtime skeptics began to shift. A commentator on a mainstream network reluctantly admitted this wasn't about policy. It was about connection. Crockett used insult. Trump used heart. And the country felt it. Meanwhile, Crockett sat in silence, scrolling through endless videos of ordinary Americans crying as they told their stories. Each one was another reminder, her insult had cut the wrong people. That evening, Trump appeared once more, this time at another rally, his voice steady but energized. "They call me an old white Nepo baby, he said with a grin. But folks, I'd rather be called that 1,000 times than stand silent while hard-working Americans suffer, the crowd roared, waving flags, chanting, USA. USA. Trump raised his hand for silence and delivered the knockout line. Crockett doesn't just insult me, she insults every one of you. And I'll never stop standing up for you, no matter what names they throw. The arena shook with thunderous applause. Tears streamed down faces as families embraced, veterans saluted, and children waved hand-painted signs. Online, the moment spread like wildfire. This is history, one user posted. Another wrote, he turned her insult into America's anthem. Meanwhile, Crockett's office was eerily quiet. Phones rang with angry constituents while allies kept their distance. She stared blankly at the TV, watching Trump's crowd erupt in joy and tears, realizing her attack had built his strongest moment yet. And America, divided but captivated, leaned in even closer, knowing the clash was far from over. By morning, Crockett's team scrambled to regain control. They drafted statements, pitched interviews, and even called in favors from friendly networks. We need to flip this back on Trump, one aide insisted, his voice cracking with desperation. But every attempt backfired. When Crockett appeared on a local station to repeat her claim that Trump was a Nepo baby, the anchor pressed her about the ethics complaints and donor scandals now trending online. She stuttered, dodged, and changed the subject, but the clip went viral anyway. Look at her squirm, one farmer posted on X. She had all the confidence to mock him, but none to answer real questions. Even some of her allies quietly distanced themselves. A Democratic strategist told a reporter off the record, she gave him the biggest political gift of the shutdown, and he's milking it. Meanwhile, Trump's Dallas rally footage continued to surge online, hitting millions of views. The chants of USA, USA echoed through every feed. Crockett's voice had grown smaller, drowned out by a wave she couldn't stop. For the first time, she felt what Trump had promised, the lesson she never saw coming. Across the nation, something unusual happened. Ordinary Americans, not politicians, began shaping the conversation. Veterans posted videos praising Trump's defense of them. Mothers recorded tearful testimonies about struggling through the shutdown but finding hope in his words. Farmers with dirt still on their hands spoke into phones about how Crockett's insult felt like a slap in the face. One video in particular went viral, a little girl in Iowa holding a sign that read, "President Trump, thank you for standing up for my daddy." Her father, a farmer, stood behind her, wiping tears from his eyes. Networks couldn't ignore it. The human side of the story overtook the political bickering. Analysts admitted the tide of emotion was overwhelming. This isn't just a fight between Trump and Crockett, one anchor said. This is America weighing in. Trump himself reposted dozens of these clips, captioning one with, "This is why I fight. For them, for you." Crockett watched in silence, realizing that her insult had ignited a storm far bigger than she had ever intended. The people had chosen sides, and she was losing theirs. That evening, Trump stood once more at the White House podium. His tone was lighter this time, but the sting was sharper. Jasmine Crockett says, I can't pronounce names. Folks, I've built skyscrapers, signed deals with world leaders, and made peace in the Middle East. I think I can handle a few names. Except maybe hers, because it sounds like crooked. The room burst into laughter. Even some journalists couldn't suppress grins. Online, memes exploded with the phrase "crooked Crockett." But then Trump's voice grew serious. It's not about me. It's about the farmers she mocked, the families she ignored, the workers she laughed at. You are not forgotten. You will never be forgotten while I am your president. The crowd watching from outside erupted in cheers, tears streaming down faces as chants of "We love Trump" filled the air. Crockett, watching from her office, felt the walls closing in. What began as a jab had turned into a national reckoning. Trump hadn't just silenced her, he had transformed her insult into a rallying cry for millions. And America couldn't stop talking about it. By now, Jasmine Crockett was running on fumes. The calls pouring into her office weren't from supporters but from furious constituents demanding answers. Her staff shuffled nervously, whispering about donors who had gone silent, allies who had vanished, and reporters who suddenly stopped taking her calls. That evening, Crockett sat for a live interview, hoping to steady her image. But halfway through, the host asked bluntly, "Representative, Do you regret calling the president an old white Nepo baby, considering the backlash? For a moment, the cameras caught her face stiffen. She forced to laugh, but her eyes betrayed panic. The clip spread within minutes. Hashtags like Crockett cracks and not sorry, but scared trended worldwide. On X, users posted side-by-side videos, Trump commanding roaring crowds while Crockett fumbled through excuses. The contrast was devastating. One headline captured the mood perfectly. Crockett tried to humiliate Trump. Instead, she humiliated herself. And as the night grew darker, even some Democrats privately admitted the truth. She had become the liability no one wanted to defend. Across America, the energy only grew. Trump's supporters, already fired up, rallied harder than ever. In Pennsylvania, thousands gathered spontaneously outside a federal building, chanting "We stand with Trump," while holding handwritten signs. In Florida, Cuban immigrants waved flags, shouting "He fights for us." What struck the media most was the diversity of the crowds. Black families, Hispanic business owners, and Asian veterans stood side by side with rural farmers and truck drivers. The message was clear. This wasn't just Trump versus Crockett. This was America standing against the insult. A viral video showed an elderly veteran wiping tears as he saluted a giant American flag. "I served under many presidents," he said, his voice trembling. "But I've never seen one fight back for us like Trump does." Even critics began to acknowledge something powerful was happening. "This is no longer just political theater," one analyst admitted. "It has become an emotional reckoning." Meanwhile, Crockett stayed silent, her office lights dimmed, watching her own insult transform into the strongest weapon against her. On October 8th, President Trump stepped before the cameras once more. This time, not at a rally, but inside the White House. His words carried both fire and compassion. "America, you saw what happened. They called me names. They mocked me. But I don't care about me. I care about you. The farmers, the families, the workers furloughed by this shutdown. You are my fight." His voice cracked with emotion as he recounted letters he'd received from children whose parents lost jobs during the shutdown. Holding one up, he read aloud, "Dear President Trump, my mommy says we can't pay the bills, but she says you are trying to help. Please don't give up." The room fell silent. Cameras zoomed in on Trump's face as he paused, visibly moved. "To that little girl, and to every American family, I will never give up." Millions watched live, and many cried openly. Online, the clip exploded. Trump's defining moment became the headline everywhere. And Jasmine Crockett, she vanished from the conversation for the first time. Even her critics admitted she had been silenced not by Trump's insults, but by his humanity. Capitol Hill had never been this quiet. Lawmakers who once laughed at Trump's expense now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The echo of his words about families, farmers, and the forgotten men and women of America hung in the air like a weight. Reporters in the press gallery exchanged looks. Even the most hostile journalists struggled to spin the moment. Crockett, usually quick with biting remarks, sat frozen, her hands clenched under the table. Trump's comeback hadn't been cruel for the sake of cruelty. It had been layered with facts, humor, and a brutal reminder of who really carried the weight of America's struggles. It wasn't just a defense, it was an expose. And then the unthinkable happened. A smattering of applause came from the back of the chamber. At first hesitant, but then it grew, lawmakers and staffers clapping, despite party lines.